for the penultimate time in 25-26. We're back with another episode of Walking the London Road, and this one's going to be a very interesting podcast, as the last few have been basically a little mini-series for you on assessing the Oxford United squad going into League One. But of course, before we go any further, Connor, how are we doing?
We're doing okay, Sam. We're keeping thoroughly entertained for the EFL playoffs. You've been keeping up to date.
I have indeed. Yep, they've been action-packed on and off the pitch. And I will say because I was watching the Southampton Borough playoff semi-final. I just had it on the side, and watching that cross float in kind of at the corner of my eye, I thought, has he gone for that angle? But you watch it back and go, that's 100% cross.
Yeah, you do, absolutely ridiculous. Ridiculous it found the back of the net though, but should they even be playing in the final? But that's for another discussion, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Before we get further into it, folks, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support on recent podcasts has been incredible and massively, massively appreciated. Like we said last week, going to be taking a little bit of a summer break so we can enjoy the World Cup in June. But we'll be back to bring you all the goodness and bad of Oxford United in podcast form. Before we get on with the main topic, a couple of small things to mention that have happened in the world of the EFL since last week. Obviously, the squad cost rules have replaced PSR in a vote of 20-4. I would guess that was one of Oxford United's final votes, was to get rid of PSR and replace it with squad cost rules. Con and I were chatting just before we began, and we don't really understand it, but it seems similar to the rules in other leagues, which will benefit the bigger clubs with bigger stadiums and so on.
I guess so, yeah. It looks like that it's only in the Championship, so I don't think it'll affect us in League One or clubs in League Two. But should there ever be an instance in the very near future where we're promoted again, that might be a hindrance. And again, Sam, it underlines why we need the stadium built, because then further income, and then if we're aligned to these rules, it means that we can spend more.
100%. Also, obviously, next season, as well as that coming in, we'll also have the new playoff system. So we really picked the worst season to go down, because all these new, I'll say fun, tricks of the EFL's trade are coming into effect. Also, worth mentioning, obviously, we talked about the playoff semi-finals, the Spygate saga that had been unfolding between Middlesbrough and Southampton. Obviously, it doesn't really apply to us, but there has been reports that other Championship clubs, I think the report most recent was at least 4 others, had reported concerns that their training sessions might have been spied on by Southampton. Not saying, that was definitely Oxford United, but I think if you look at the way Southampton counteracted us, I think either their analysis team have been watching a lot of our games, or they've been watching training. That's complete speculation, and I'll throw in an allegedly there as well, just to because, like I say, it's one of these situations where where we saw the Bielsa thing happen a couple of years ago, and we were all thinking, I wonder. I think it was the spreadsheet he came up with it, Connor, didn't he? In a press conference, just had an all breakdown of all the sides that he'd scouted and that kind of thing. And, it's that spurred on this rule change.
It was, yeah, because I think that in other countries, especially where Bielsa was, thinking like Spain, Argentina, and now it seems that in Germany as well, supposedly, that this goes on a lot. So Eckhart, either he didn't read the rule book, or he's just incredibly stupid and ignorant, because I'm using Eckhart because he hasn't denied it. Neither Southampton haven't denied it either. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens over the next 6 days from now, before the Championship playoff final takes place.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, I don't think that Southampton are going to get chucked out.
No,
because it will just be absolute lawsuits galore. However, I can see an instance where the EFL, they impose a sanction, say next time that you're in the championship, you'll be starting on X amount of points. But even then, you start to think, what if in some universe Southampton aren't relegated to the championship for another 10 years? Are you still going to have that lingering over them? Well, they've
Yeah.
made billions in revenue. So, if you're Middlesbrough, you're absolutely seething. It would have been so much easier if Middlesbrough had won, and then the EFL knew what they could do immediately with Southampton.
Yeah, I think going into that playoff final, most people are going to be supporting Hull City. I think it's fair to say. In terms of what a prospective punishment should be, obviously, the EFL have really had their regulatory side tested in the last few weeks of the campaign. Obviously, with the West Brom points deduction situation, and now Southampton. Personally, just my own view, I think they should impose a 37-point deduction on Southampton. It's in the rule, but you can't be breaking those laws, and that's totally not the amount of points we'd need to survive in the division. But I think you're right. It's likely to be a hefty fine or a suspended points deduction, and then they'll play that playoff final. Like I said, hopefully Hull win it.
Yes, I think that everybody in the nation, bar Southampton fans, will be Hull City supporters. I suspect, especially if Southampton are found guilty. And I think that if Southampton are found guilty, then Hull will just want to be out even more, because they'll see how much of a shambles that the English Football League and its administrators and the people who run it, Trevor Birch, Rick Parry, are. And, it's not just in punishments, in the sporting sense, also in financial senses as well. They've been absolutely atrocious. So, the sooner you can get out of the EFL the right way, I think all the clubs would be very, very happy about that.
100%. I mean, obviously, it's interesting to go in a playoff final with this, because obviously Hull have been a targeted club. Is not the right word to use, but it's the only one I can think of at the minute. But obviously they've had a number of problems with the EFL in recent years. I think they're still under a transfer fee embargo.
Yeah, they're still under a transfer embargo. And that completely escaped my mind, Sam. How great of a story it would be that a club that sacked their manager last season, or at the end of last season, a club which has only been able to use loans and free transfers for both windows in this campaign, if they were to go on and get promoted, because I didn't have them anywhere near the top six. I don't think most other people had them anywhere near the top six. But I distinctly remember at the start of the season, Hull City fans saying, I don't think that you lot actually realise how good of a team that we've managed to assemble. And myself included, a lot of people just laughed and said, that's just a lot of, location and fan bias. But they're a bloody good team. And if they were to get promoted, they would thoroughly deserve it, because they've been magnificent to watch on the eye.
I think a lot of it has to do with Balumi being able to stay fit, because obviously you saw last season that I think he signed in that summer window and maybe played like a month of games maybe, and then got a really serious knock, which meant he was out for pretty much the rest of the campaign. And I mean, Ruben Ruskin was still spinning after what Balumi did to him. Two, fantastic contributions in the Millwall game. That is a very special talent. And like you said, start of the season, we were both going, oh, Hull will be around us. And, after we played them, some Hull fans in our comments are going, oh, why did you think? That's because you were around us last season. You were around us last season. You were pretty poor. And like you said, sack Ruben Sayers, which what a mad last 12 months he's had. Keep Hull in the division, then gets sacked, then goes into Sheffield United and has an absolutely honking start to the season and gets sacked again.
Then goes to Spain and he's sacked again.
I don't think you can find a manager that's had a worse last 12 months than Ruben Sayers. But, like you say, we'll be watching that playoff final with great interest and hopefully... I was going to say for the good of football, but Hull also broke rules. That's why they're in a fee embargo. So we'll just say more recent rules of football will hope that Hull get over the line. So obviously, as we talked about in this little mini series covering kind of how Oxford need to prepare going into next campaign, we're going to talk about the loans, because over the last 2 seasons in the Championship, we've relied more this season heavily on loan players, and going back into League One, it's going to be interesting to see how the club approach their general recruitment, but loans in particular. So obviously we'll cover the loan players we've had over the past 2 seasons momentarily, but going back to the promotion season, obviously we had James Beadle for the first 6 months, and he was recalled by Brighton. He was replaced by Jamie Cumming, Stan Mills, Finn Stevens. I think if I remember rightly, Carl Edwards was also on loan, and I can't remember any others that we had on loan that season, Connor.
No, I can't remember any others either. No, you know what? I always forget that James Beadle was first 6 months of the season. He was with us.
And it was absolutely outrageous.
He was, yeah. He was just clearly too good for the division. That's why he went to Sheffield United. Oh, sorry, Sheffield Wednesday.
Yeah, and had a great 6 months there, and then not so good following campaign. So obviously, as the kind of the flow of transfers usually goes, especially in the lower divisions, the loans that Oxford signed mostly were those looking for experience from Premier League clubs. So if we look at our first campaign back in the Championship, we signed Ben Nelson, of course, on loan from Leicester City, who was superb. And if only he didn't have that nasty little injury at the start of his campaign with us, I think we might have been safe for a bit earlier, because just the quality of player that he is. Malcolm Abiwe, who I think is the complete opposite of that. Clearly talent, but there's clearly some other problems going on. That's why he's failed at us and elsewhere. Dane Scarlett, another 6-month loan before that was cancelled, and then Alex Matos. So that's very much, every one of those players was bought in from, at the time, a Premier League side, and I think we talked about it at the time, Connor, that it was very much, I think, a 50-50 in terms of success and not success.
Yeah, I think that's fair, especially, I'll try and think off the top of my head of when we bought in Abiwe, as I said, did not live up to what we hoped that it would be. Excuse me. Matos coming in, I thought that he did. I thought he showed okay in spells, but maybe not as great as we thought he did. That's not to say that he didn't make the contribution when was required. But when you think about that season, you think really about the likes of Ben Nelson, really the star loan signing. And as you say, if the poor kid hadn't got injured, then I'm sure that we would have, during that end running. It was a good few months or so. We went without a win, didn't we? And up until the Sunderland game, I'm sure that we would have been keeping clean sheets, and we would have had more points, and we would have been firmly safe before that Sunderland game.
And we talked about it last in 2025 still, but earlier this campaign when we were doing our best 11 for the year. I think 2 out of the 3 of us might have put a full lineup of or full defence of centre halves, because there was that period where it was Long, it was Hellick, it was Ben Nelson, it was Kieran Brown, and they were absolutely sensational as a 4. And like you say, we just kind of sit thinking, what if we'd had that for the rest of the season? The approach to bringing in youth from Premier League sides is more common, because typically older players are done with the development phase of their career and they want to find a place where they can actually knuckle down and get some significant game time. Of the players from last season, do you think, other than obviously Ben Nelson, do you think any of them were... Let me think of the best way to put this. Any of them were worth the... Because like you say, Matos was good in spells. Dane Scarlett had his moments. But then obviously the Malcolm Abui situation... I'm not sure if overall the money that was spent to bring all those players in, barring, as I said, Ben Nelson, as you know how much I love Alex Matos, if we really got our money's worth for, that money could have gone on maybe another permanent signing.
Maybe, but then you could also make the argument that, we did secure championship safety that season. And I think that season really, it was just, safety, not no matter what the cost, but if we come in and then, if these players come in and then we've stayed up, then that's money well spent. I made the same argument when we signed Tom Bradshaw. Don't get me wrong, he didn't pull a single tree or a single root up whatsoever. But at the time, I thought if we're spending 150k or whatever it was to bring him in permanently, that to me at the time, if it meant that it secured us championship safety for that season, then that was money well spent, because, as we're going to experience, the income that was probably generated from, in terms of commercial and TV deals from being in the championship for a second season, would have been far more greater than what we'd have had if we'd have got relegated that season and we spent this year in League One.
Yeah. And we talked about it, I think, at the time on a more broader sense in regard to the two transfer windows, is that August of 2024, that was the window of a club going, we're back in the championship, let's try and, we play football the right way, we want to sign all these young, hungry players and all that kind of stuff. And obviously it fit the managers we had at the time, Des, bringing in El Mazzuni, bringing in, Jack Curry, Malcolm Abui, Ben Nelson, and then it was when Rowett came in the door, it was a case of, like you say, Bradshaw, Hellick, extending Joe Bennett's time for another couple of months, and so on and so forth.
It was also, sorry, Sam, it was also a case of, I think that from the summer, the correct media answer is always, we prep for League One and we prep for the Championship. But if we're absolutely honest, I think that the board, and specifically Tim Williams and Grant Ferguson, alluded it to themselves. If you listen really carefully to some of their answers, that we were ahead of schedule in terms of promotion to the Championship. I really honestly don't think that they expected to get promotion when they did, or even to win that game at Wembley. So already we were 3-4 weeks behind a lot of other clubs already. And I think that's where you find that a lot. It was almost seemed a little bit to me, if you take a step back and take a wider look, a bit of a scattergun approach from that transfer window. Don't get me wrong, there were some that worked and some that were, showed up every now and then, and some that have been absolutely dog. But as you say, then we changed to Rowett, who has a completely different style of system to Des, and it just became, we just tried to become shithouse FC for that transfer window.
Yeah, it was, defend at all costs, catch them on the break kind of thing. And then looking at the loans for this campaign, obviously in the summer it was Lancashire, Connacht, not Connacht, it was Lancashire, Davies, Makoso, Ruskin, and hang on, sorry, I've just looked at the wrong part of transfer market, my apologies. So let me try that again. Lancashire, Prelic, Davies, Krastev, and I feel like there was one more and it's escaping my memory.
Davies, Lancashire, Krastev, Prelitz. Oh gosh, let's take a look. Great content. Let's take a look. Hang on, I've almost got it.
Luke Harris, that was it.
Ah, yes, so memorable.
I know. So that was the loans, and I think we spoke about at the time that though more than Luke Harris, and arguably, although he had a fantastic season, the Will Lancashire signings, those seemed more like the signings of a League One club.
Yeah.
Prelic from the league and the division he came from, him, Davies and Krastev, I think those did seem like championship loan signings. And the way it kind of tells the story of the approach under Gary Rowett at the time was, of course, you have Ben Davies, who is a very experienced centre-half. As I mentioned a moment ago, loans at that age are rare. It speaks more to your parent club has nothing for you, and your wages are likely too high for someone to come and sign you on a permanent basis.
Yeah, and I think that was the exact position that we were in and Ben Davies was in. And excuse me, it didn't take a genius, I don't think, when we signed him for loads of fans to figure that out. That Rangers just wanted him off their books, as much as they could, and we definitely weren't going to pay his full wage packet. So even if we were paying 30-40%, and at that time we desperately needed a left-sided centre half, so I think that we were going to pay whatever it would have taken to bring some experience down the left-hand side. And the bloke was really unfortunate through the entire season because he really didn't get the game time I think that he was hoping for. Only 10 matches throughout the season.
Which, that's definitely, we'll talk about it again in a minute, but if you look at the financial impact of that on the club, I think that goes down as a big negative. Respect to Ben Davies, I thought he was relatively decent when he was at the club, but for the limited matches he played, that goes down. We talked about, I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, last week, can't quite remember, about talking about Ed Waldron, the recruitment team's track record. That goes down as a big thumbs down, surely purely from a financial perspective. I think we spoke about at the time that Luke Harris did seem like that has the feeling of a deadline day, get one more through the door kind of signing.
That's Tyler Smith signing under Carl Robinson.
Yeah. But he was the third player in the door that at the start of the campaign. And I think that to me told the story of, signing the Premier League players that had okay previous spells. Obviously, Lancashire had 11 appearances for West Brom last season, and very much another development campaign. And then obviously we've talked a million times about Philip Krastev and kind of seeing, oh my God, this lad looks incredible playing for Pex Vol. He's going to tear it up in the champ. But I think this loans period to me strikes of manager versus recruitment team.
Yeah. Have you seen where Krastev is now and how his season panned out?
Gottsp in Turkey. I saw that I think he was involved in their first 2 matches after he arrived, but I didn't see how he did afterwards.
He is currently injured because he's done his Achilles tendon. Yeah. So it hasn't exactly been a great season for Philip Krastev, I would suggest. But yeah, going manager against recruitment team, it could be that. You just don't know. We don't know how much power that Rowett was slinging around and what he was wanting, and how the club philosophy, if it went against what Rowett was wanting, I think that you wouldn't be unwise to suggest quite possibly that's what might it have been. Somewhere or another, I think that there must have been some clash of ideologies, or there must have been a miscommunication. But given that summer window as well, ultimately it falls on Ed and Ed Waldron, and it was a bit of a calamity of a summer window. 100%. Apart from obviously Will Lancashire, in terms of loan signings.
And I don't think it's a coincidence that what's that? Quick maths. That 60% of the players that were signed in that window on loans returned to their parent clubs. At the end of that, it I think spells how, like I said, the club I think were in two minds when dealing with the loans, because obviously loans are such a you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. I was trying to think of another metaphor to use, but because on the one hand, look at a player like Luke Harris, look at Lancashire, look at Nick Prellick. These are, Prellick's in a different situation than Lancashire and Harris, because Luke Harris and Will Lancashire, these are two unproven in EFL that done very well in Premier League 2 for their clubs. So, and obviously off the back of two seasons where they didn't get the amount of minutes I'm sure they were hoping for, and when they did get those opportunities, the fans in the West Midlands we were speaking to about these two weren't particularly impressed from what they saw.
No, not at all. And I think that also, like, with some of the loan signings, especially when we were Championship and the size of the club that we are in the Championship, sometimes being realistic, and sometimes some loan players, if they just see the face of the club, you wouldn't be too shocked if they kind of turn their nose up at it. And then maybe that just shows the character that they are. They know that they're going to be in a dogfight all season. And I guess that's maybe why also Lancashire would just took to him, because he knew full well what he was coming into and what his season potentially would have looked like. So, that's also another reason why sometimes in the position that we were, it was a lot harder to bring in some of these good young loan players. But this summer coming, you'd like to think that would be a team that's going to be up and around the upper echelons, and it might be a bit easier if we wanted to bring in loan signings. And also, like we had with Dane Scarlett before, now Will Lancashire, you never know if they're like we had under Carl Robinson. We started to form a good relationship with West Ham. You never know what can come from Spurs if they have something else on the conveyor belt. But they think, try them out at League One level if they've been, at League Two or been smashing the goals in a Premier League too.
Speaking of Spurs, obviously the January loan signings were Donnelly, Konak, Makoso and Ruskin. Obviously Ruskin turned into a permanent halfway through the campaign, or halfway through the last 6 months, I should say. I think, again, we talked about the conflict between recruitment team and manager. I think this is, again, a case of the recruitment team learning from their mistakes in the previous campaign. Obviously, Donnelly he'd been fine on loan. I think he was Stoke for the first 6 months of the campaign. Hadn't got the amount of minutes he would have hoped for, but a player that had played in the Championship. Konak, a very talented player that had played in the Turkish Superliga, but obviously this is first loan in English football. And then Makoso, who had 6 months worth of football with Luton, and then obviously Ruskin. Ruskin, he's now an Oxford United player, so I'll give him all benefit of the doubt and stuff like that. But I don't think it's a shock that he is good friends with Brian de Keersmacher, and that was a big contributing factor why he was brought in the door.
That could be very awkward come the summer.
Yeah,
if reports to be believed.
We'll definitely wait and see on that. But 3 of those 4 are young, hungry, and I think the situation of bringing players in halfway through the season, I think, is a lot different than signing them at the beginning of the campaign. Because, Konak had fleeting appearances in the Prem. Donnelly, like we say, had played a couple of minutes in the Championship. Makoso had been in and out of that Luton side. So these are players that are more ready to contribute than in the summer when kind of you need to get season and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and as you say, especially with players like Donnelly who've come in and have had that Championship experience in whether it be in the first half of this season, and especially when they have something to prove. If it hasn't really worked out, say for Donnelly at Stoke, he came in, and then I guess you have other players who we brought in on loan from League One at the time, like Ruskin and Makoso.
Yeah,
like they thought that maybe this is a challenge, and I can prove why I think that I should be a championship player. And unfortunately for either of them, I don't think that happened whatsoever. And one of them now that we're it seems that we're stuck with. And as you say, we'll see when we come back after our summer break what's happening there. But it seems that overall, like, we left from what Gary Rowett was doing, like Gary Rowett typical sense of bringing in the old guard, and we started to revert back to what we wanted to do, whether that be what Matt Bloomfield wants to do, or whether, now he's been told that these are the players that you're going to get. We're going back to this identity, just those little green shoots that are coming through. And I know we're not really talking about them, but also from permanent transfers as well. Like, apart from Pert Harris, I guess, maybe, because but when you look at players like McDonald and Jin Woo, like young players coming on permanent signings, so it was nice to see that that was what we were going back to, but just a window too late, as it would turn out to be.
100%. So looking forward to what the club might look to do and what we think the club should do in regard to loans for our return to League One. I think one of the big issues the club made for themselves is bringing in players that basically have to start. So, you look at, Ben Davies, a lot of money from Rangers, meant he pretty much had to start. One of Lancashire Prelic has to start because, we love Sparky so much, but we saw in the previous campaign that he is not really a championship caliber striker. Even later arrivals, like Kunak, I think is less so, but Donnelly, when he came in, it was a case of, he's got to start, then that's the number 10 sewn up. Whereas I think what the club did really well for the loans in League One is bringing in players that will provide competition, and if they can put some performances together, maybe they lock down that right back spot. I look at, Finn Stevens versus Sam Long in the promotion campaign. Finn was a little bit more attack minded and really grew into himself and developed as a footballer, which he was able to do because the pressure wasn't on him every single week, because Sam Long was there to he was considered the starting right back, and Finn was just able to grow and develop. And then towards the back end of his time with the club, he was able to compete for that place.
Yeah, and you'd like to think going into League One, that's what we're going to be doing similarly. So we're not just chucking in, these, especially when we brought some of these loan players in the summer who had never had their taste of English football, and just throwing them straight into the bear pit. I know that some of them a couple were more experienced, but it's a tough physical league, the championships, and then coming down into League One, when we played Sheffield Wednesday in the last home game of the season, that's about the standard that League One is probably going to be, with the lower half of League One anyway. And if players want to come in and they want to try and develop their confidence, and they have some sort of experienced head who's in their position who can mentor them and guide them, that's what you're going to want when we're going into the season coming up, as you say.
I mean, another example I use is Stan Mills. Obviously, his loan is cut short due to a horrific injury he suffers at Coventry in the FA Cup, but we went into that season thinking, okay, our starting wide men are going to be Marcus Brown, and we signed Carl Edwards, who's obviously an experienced head. I think he's one of the exceptions to that, because obviously he came in from newly promoted Ipswich. Had a pretty decent campaign helping them go up. But for the most part, like I say, especially with the youth, the pressure wasn't on the shoulders. The only one I think where that didn't apply was James Beadle. Obviously, when Beadle comes in, the number 2 was Simon Eastwood. The club knew that, I think Jack Stevens was I think he'd gone permanently instead of going out on loan in that summer. And it's a case of we need a new number one. But some players shrink and some will thrive off being challenged to be that number one. But I think for the vast majority of cases that we've seen at the club, it's the case of all the pressure put on these lads, and sometimes the weight of expectation can be a bit too much.
That might be a fear going into next season as well. In that we're not going to be the biggest club by name going into League One, but I think from the fan base, and I guess from one of my very early predictions is that a lot from the media, from podcasts and media and TikTokers that cover the entirety of the EFL, are going to have us right up there. And that's just going to snowball, and that's going to catalyst. And I don't say up there as in top 6. I wouldn't put it past if the vast majority put us in top 2 or expect us to be in around top 2 because of the squad that we have currently.
Yeah,
and
100%.
How we can probably spend more than Leicester. Maybe not so much Sheffield Wednesday now, but that's from what I surmise, that's going to be more of a rebuilding process rather than just chucking loads of money at it. They're going to have to get their foundations right, and that's for a preview episode 3 months down the line. However, going back to my point, that pressure that's going to be from what the chatter, the outside noise is going to be, that Oxford United will be looking for around top 2 because of the squad that they've got, the manager, the financial resources that they'll have for the level. So it's also going to be, as I was saying, how these young kids can cope with that pressure.
And it's you always expect newly relegated sides to be right up amongst, like you say, because for the vast majority of the time they've kept some of the players around in their squad, and that's quality for the league above and all that kind of stuff. But like you say, we'll talk about that as the summer goes and we see more happen. Any final points you want to make on the loans? Any players you think might be available for temporary switches that you think the club should be looking at?
Temporaries? Oh, yes, there is one, and if we get him, I think that it could be a game changer for us. And it's such a I was gonna say household name, EFL name. It's such a basic name, but he's a terrific player. And at one time we were reported at being in for him, but I wonder because he hasn't had as much game time as he'd like. If we were to manage to bring in a player like Davis Killer Dunn in the number 10, bring him in from Wrexham, bring him in on season loan because he's not playing at championship level. I don't think that he's a championship level player, especially that top end, upper echelon. I've been thinking about what you said a few weeks ago, needing the number 10. And I was watching Bolton the other night and I was looking at Ruben Rodriguez and I was thinking, when we lost you in that number 10, that is when it was glaringly obvious what the problem was. And it was because we lost you.
Yeah.
And I couldn't, no fan could take it away from him that he wanted to, at the time, he wanted to go play in Brazil. And it was an absolute dumpster fuck what happened over there. But he earned that right to go over there. So if we were to get a player like that, that is a statement signing at League One level in that number 10 position. And, if it is Harris that will be starting in the number 10, he'd have weapons around him like an Amaku, a Killian Dunn, a Stan Mills, hopefully out on the right-hand side. And then you got other players that you can come in, like Tyler Goodrum, you've got Jin Woo who can come in, and you start to think, and it takes shape that front four, and you think that is a bloody good League One attacking force right there.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I will say that. Go on.
I was going to say, what about yourself?
Caleb Dunn is a really, really good shot. I hadn't even considered him, but you're right, like extremely limited minutes at Wrexham. I think they signed him for, what was it, £3 million?
Yeah.
That's I mean, Wrexham can just write that off, but I wonder if he's sat there thinking, why the hell did I come to this place when, I mean, the strikers they've got at their disposal. I think, I mean, it was clear to me that he was never going to get consistent minutes.
No.
But obviously, it entirely depends on what happens over the rest of the season in the leagues above. It's an obvious shout, but I think one that kind of really sticks in my head is Mikey Moore off the season he's had at Rangers, but he's minimum going to be Championship, if not starting for Spurs next season. Maybe a... Oh, just trying to think now. I can't think of... I haven't got a name off the top of my head, but I think you're right. Someone like Akila Dunn, someone who... maybe made a move to a Championship side in the January and hasn't worked out for them. They want to get some consistent minutes under their belt. But we will wait and see what the club get up to in the transfer market, because it's mad to think, because our campaign has been done for the last 3 weeks. I think we mentioned it last week that... I'm enjoying not having the stress of watching Oxford, but I'm really missing all the stuff around going to the games. And we're not even, the transfer window has not officially opened yet, but already a lot of the links are starting to swell. Thanks for watching, folks. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. As I said at the start of the video, really massively appreciate all the support you've given to us this campaign. Follow us on our socials, you can see on screen. And we'll be back next week, post the playoff final, the League 2 playoff final, for our too early League 1 predictions, talking about what we think will happen in the 3rd division. And it's going to be funny, because I can tell you for a fact that we'll come back from our little summer break. One of those early shows will be our proper predictions, and we'll laugh ourselves from some of the shouts we had. But thanks so much for watching, folks, and we'll see you next week.